welcome to the Fun with Friends podcast, Wandering Creatives Edition. I'm your host, Arden Coutts, and joining me today is Josephine Spilka. Josephine is a teacher, a mentor, and body advocate who has years of practicing classical Chinese medicine, Buddhist meditation, and is also an essential oils educator. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure.
I'm insanely excited to have you on and to learn a little bit more about your journey into classical Chinese medicine and essential oils, and to just learn a little bit more about your practice. So again, thanks so much.
Yeah.
So to start with, can you share a little bit more about who you are and your current practice?
Yeah. So currently, I am practicing in a way that is a little bit unusual, but has a long history I think in medicine in general, but particularly in Asia, where the stories that are told are that when people were sick in a particular village, that they would go to stay with the doctor until they were better. That the way healthcare worked was that the home of the doctor was the place where they could get care. So people would come and maybe they would have a treatment or they'd go home. But if they were still sick, oftentimes they would just stay there. So that was my inspiration a number of years ago to start inviting people to do retreats with me, to stay in my home. And I love cooking for people. So I customize the food, they get treatments, they get to meditate with me. We do workshops, I take their picture, we do all kinds of things. So I call those medicine retreats. They focus on your particular situation. I customize everything I do, and you get the cooking pot. You get to stay in the pot for anywhere from 1 to 18 days.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So some forms of classical Chinese medicine require that amount of time to go for a full treatment cycle. So that is where that time frame comes from.
Oh, that's super. I love that. I think it's one very interesting, that type of practice, but I also think that it makes a lot of sense because you're kind of getting to maybe step away from the things that are impacting your health and like remove yourself from those environments and situations and just really like step back and focus on you and what's going on with your body and your mental health. And I don't know, I'm a fan. I've joked with you before that I might have to come and see you, and it's becoming less and less of a joke and more of a need, I think, the longer I learn or the more I learn about it. So I find it really interesting, that style of practice.
Yeah, I think it's needed in this world. We don't slow down and take time, and oftentimes our environments are not very supportive of our health. They're not built around the healthiest things for us. So sometimes just being in a new environment, like you're saying, works really well. But I also feel like when you are being cared for, you learn in a different way. Like you learn on a body level. You don't have to think about it. It's not like hard work. You actually are receiving, which, we tend to diminish the importance of that in our culture that's all about doing. But actually receiving is very, very important. And you learn a whole different way about yourself and about your body and, about what is needed.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up because I was just getting ready to say something about the act of being cared for and how that just like replenishes the body a little bit because you don't have to like think about it for yourself.
Right. When people are with me, I do all the cooking. They receive treatments. We do some workshopping but they get to do walks and meditate and rest. And this is a kind of nourishment, a kind of food too. And the one that's lacking in the world at large these days, for the most part.
Yeah, I'm, again, huge fan of all of this because it's something that I feel like a lot of people are missing in their lives, is that like they may be cared for or are caring for others more than themselves. So yeah, just having that opportunity to step back and breathe, it probably does so much for them.
Yeah. Well, you can have, first of all, a different kind of learning, but second of all, you can change more quickly when you get that rest. When you know, it's like you wouldn't change the tires on your car while you were driving it. I mean, people say they want to make changes to their health, but they don't want to stop and let that change take place.
Yeah.
But think about it like a car, which your body's not a car because it's way more complicated than that. But at the same time, you wouldn't expect that of a car or a plant, that they would be able to grow while they were in the process of being moved. So creating the conditions where you can actually allow change to happen is really important.
Yeah. Great analogy. It's a really good way to think about it. So I'm curious as to how you got into practicing Chinese medicine, especially in such a, I guess, in a more traditional manner where you're bringing people in and taking care of them. Were you interested in it kind of always, or did you just kind of like find yourself drawn to it?
Yeah. Well, I have to say that, I mean, first of all, I became interested in Chinese medicine because I was not a well person. And when I was young and I met an acupuncturist and I became enamored of it because Chinese medicine is very poetic and I've always loved poetry. So a lot of the old texts are basically like poems. They're very metaphorical and beautiful. And I fell in love with that language and that way of talking about things. But the idea of working in this way probably came about because of my introversion, my nature to be rather, I wouldn't say, I'm not always a homebody, but I'm partly, I think it's just that I like to create the environment for people. And I think environment is healing. It's actually powerful to have an environment that's designed to be beautiful and comfortable and have the right food and all of that. And that just didn't seem plausible to me in a doctor's office the way I understood it. Plus, at that time, I was also, originally when I went to acupuncture school, I was interested in being a midwife and an acupuncturist, which are almost impossible to do together because babies come when babies come. And if you have appointments, you can't be available. Baby's coming. So it was kind of a silly idea, but I did anyway, the year I got out of acupuncture school, become a lay midwife. And that's a very similar kind of idea, at least lay midwifery is. People having babies in their homes, which of course, long before there were hospitals, people had babies in their homes. Kind of normal.
Yes. So you said that, let me think of how I want to phrase this. What's, I guess, one of the more, you kind of mentioned that like Chinese medicine has like a poetic aspect to it. Would you say that that's maybe one of the more powerful or capturing things about it to you? Or is there something else that you just really connects you to the practice?
No, I would say it's the single most powerful part of it, is that it talks about the body the way poets talk about the world. You know, like the language and the images and everything are taken from the way we experience the natural world. And it's just so beautiful to me. It's like you could see your body the way you see the trees and the world around you. And it's this beautiful kind of resonance.
Now I feel like I need to go and read some Chinese medicinal documents or something. Like
They're amazing. They're amazing. And there's a lot of layers of implication on psycho-emotional levels, as well as physical levels, spiritual levels, you know, that they acknowledge the many layers of the experience of being human. And, Western medicine is coming around to that, but a lot of Western medicine was really focused on the literal physical experience of humanity. And the older medicine is really, they didn't separate that. They didn't separate the spirit from the form and your emotions from your body. They didn't separate those things for thousands of years. So there's thousands of years of people caring for each other and caring for bodies that is based on understanding them as inextricable, as inseparable. So that's the foundation. And we are in this culture very unaware, perhaps, that that's actually a much longer history than the last 150 years where a thermometer was invented, and therefore they were able to talk about, quote unquote, your temperature. So before there was a thermometer, I mean, this is a fun story. It was told to me when I was in my first year of acupuncture school by a man named Ted Kapchuk, who wrote a book called The Web That Has No Weaver, which was like the very first book about Chinese medicine that was popular in this country. He's a professor at Harvard in the history of medicine department, I believe. And so he tells this story a lot. Before there was a thermometer, if the doctor asks you how you feel and you say hot, the doctor doesn't question that. You feel hot. That's a fact. Now, if you say you feel hot and they take your temperature and it's not elevated, they don't think you feel hot and they don't know what to do with that information. They just say, well, you're not that sick.
You're fine.
Go home. Truth is, in Chinese medicine, if you say you're hot, that has meaning for us, even if it doesn't register on the thermometer. So there has to be room for that kind of information. And in Western medicine, there's not a lot of room for that kind of information. There's other kinds of information, and obviously that's good information. But those other types of information, the poetic, or you could say subjective information, needs to be taken into account.
Yeah, and I like that. Maybe, and by all means, right, correct me on any of this if I'm wrong, because I am no practitioner of Chinese medicine. Asterisk, I am not an expert. But it seems like classical Chinese medicine, there's more more consideration is given to each individual's needs and what's the other word I'm looking for? Like I'll cut all this out, by the way, but like not everybody is the same.
That's right. There's not one size fits all.
Yeah. So, the average temperature is what, like 98?
98.6 is supposedly the average temperature, but some of us never have that temperature.
Yeah, exactly.
It's almost never above 97.
So 98 would be warm for you.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. So this is again not accommodated by the Western medical model. They don't have room for that variation. The way they look at things. In Chinese medical model, there's a lot of room. In fact, it's quite the reverse in a way. And I say, so the word for what you're describing, that Western medicine specializes in patent medicine. Patent meaning you can buy it off the shelf or get it prescribed by the doctor because it's the same all the time. You have a headache, you take an aspirin or whatever. In Chinese medicine, that is not the case. There's maybe not infinite, but certainly at least 10 different ways you could have a headache.
Yeah.
It could be heat, it could be cold, it could be damp, it could be blood stagnation, it could be qi stagnation. There's just a lot of different ways that could manifest. So if I treat your cold headache with a cold substance, obviously I'm going to make it worse. If I treat your cold headache with a warm substance, it's going to get better. But I wouldn't know that if I wasn't analyzing it in that way.
Yeah. You just be like, take some Tylenol. I'll bill you for it in the morning. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. I wanted to also talk about your philosophy a little bit, which is that health is not the absence of disease, but instead is the presence of a person in their own experience. Can you explain what you mean by that a little bit and how you embody that in the work that you do?
Such a great question. So when you stop looking at the body and mind as separate, right? When you stop separating, because experience, it's all experience. You have experience physically, emotionally, and spiritually all at the same time. You don't have them in linear sequence. You have them all at once, right? So when you stop separating them, your healthiness is not dependent on absence of anything, right? So then instead, well, what makes you healthy? Healthy is when you are able to occupy what's happening to you. Because when you're there, your awareness is there, you have lots of choices. When your awareness is not there, you feel victimized by what happens. You don't get the choice, right? So very simple. It's like, if you're not here for what's happening, you don't get to make the choice. You just feel railroaded or overcome or overwhelmed. And this is not healthy. But if you're actually in your body, even when you have pain or discomfort, or you have a cold or a flu or whatever, you can feel healthy because you get to make the choice. That's my experience, that power, happiness, and, strength come from knowing that you have a choice.
And I've heard you say that before, health by choice. Right. I think is the phrase that you've used. And it's funny because I didn't put that phrase, health by choice, and the philosophy together until you started talking. And I was like, oh, it makes sense now.
Yeah. So, the way this part of my philosophy comes from Buddhist thinking, from Buddhist training and Buddhist thinking, which is the Buddha taught, his first teaching was something called the Four Noble Truths. And the first truth is that there is suffering. Now, a lot of people like to paraphrase that and say there's pain, but suffering is optional. But suffering is only optional if you have a choice. You have to know that you have a choice, or it's not optional. So the reason it's called the first noble truth, in a way, is that unless we acknowledge that we're suffering, we, again, don't have a choice.
Yeah.
And so when we feel pain, we do have a choice how we want to relate with that pain. One of those things that we do, most of us, most of the time, is say, I'd like to make that pain go away. Could you just take it away? The only problem with that is that pain is the language of the body itself. The pain is, even if it's emotional pain, it's the language of your being speaking to you. So when you try to shut it up, it pretty much going to come back another way.
Yeah.
And so we say in the Buddhist tradition, there's birth, old age, sickness, and death. Nothing's going to change that. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
So for a while, I called my blog that, birth, old age, sickness, and death. Now what?
Nice. That's a great name.
Well, because basically you can't stop those things from happening. So that, in my opinion, if you want to be healthy, rather than try to stop them, you work differently with what you experience. So, what my own experience with pain, for example, and I just share my recent experience that about, that I was bitten by a poisonous spider, which was very, very painful. So I really had to check in with myself, especially after a couple of days when I realized it was something other than a sort of normal bee sting or something that would go away, and it wasn't going away. And I was like, my thumb was turning colors and it was painful and waking me up at night. And at that moment, I had to decide what to do about that. Is this a pain that demands that I call my friend and go to the emergency room right this minute? Or is this a pain that I can endure and stay cognizant of? And I decided to stay cognizant of it for a number of reasons. And there were many points over the course of the last month, because it's been a month now, where I questioned my sanity in this regard. Because it was very painful and it kept coming, it kept being very painful. And at various points, I would have to say, okay, is it time to go to the urgent care? Is it time to go to the doctor? I'm doing all the things I know to do, and they're helping a little bit. It's been very slow, very slow. But because I have confidence in my own body, having related with it this way for many, many years now, I could tell it was getting incrementally better. So I wasn't terribly afraid. But if I had not had that experience with myself and I wasn't willing to listen to that pain, I probably would have just been like, at points I've been like, just amputate my thumb. It hurts too much. Just get it out of here. Which people do feel that way when they have pain, right? They just get so overwhelmed. They're like, just cut it off. Just get rid of it, And I call that the enemy way. Oh, I've now made my thumb my enemy. What good is it going to do for me to cut off my thumb? Now I don't have an opposable thumb, now I'm disabled. So, it's a little bit extreme, but again, in this case, it's not so extreme because that was a neurotoxin and it was definitely damaging the nerves in my thumb, And I couldn't tell, but I was reasonably confident in my experience that I would know if the moment came where I had to do something else than what I was doing. I was doing many things because Chinese medicine is full of advice, one of which is goat milk for poison fire bites, because fresh goat's milk has lots of enzymes that help to break down toxins.
Oh, so interesting.
You can soak your thumb, soak your whatever in it. But my point being, going back to this sort of philosophy of being willing to be in my body and listen to it and being willing to relate with it. This is healthiness to me. That's how I would define my own healthiness. I say this to people all the time. My healthiness is composed of two things: my willingness to be present and my willingness to be flexible. Because if I am inflexible and not present, I can't manage my life. I become a victim of my own life. And that will not be healthy for me.
Yeah, I really I don't know if saying I really like is the right way to word it, but I think the way that you've related to being a victim or a kind of being present and sitting in the pain and realizing, and kind of there's something I do sometimes, after I go for a walk or something and I am in pain or my legs hurt or something, I will thank them because I know they're working. So I might be in pain, but it's because I've done something and I know why I'm in pain. Whereas I could go the other way and kind of have that victim mentality, which is why am I in pain? And I shouldn't be in pain. And why is my body it's more of that negative thought process. So I like the way that you relate that to your practice and how you view your own health. I think that's really important because I personally grew up with someone who was very ill their entire life. And it was very much a victim mentality. It was, why is this happening to me? It's so hard on me. I can't do anything about it. And so there was that was the mentality. And it doesn't just affect your health. It really impacts your entire life and everyone around you.
That's right. Yeah. So this is why I actually say health powered by choice, because it's a question of feeling your own power here. And power is the power of love, right? Love is the unifying strategy. Enemy is the separation strategy. So when we demonize a part of our bodies or a part of our experience, and we are separate from it, then we feel the pain of separateness, of loneliness, of excommunication, of being an outcast. And one writer that I admire a lot, that her name is Dina Metzger, and she wrote a book called Entering the Ghost River, Meditations on the Theory and Practice of Healing. And she says that like people treat a cancer cell like it's an outcast from the body, and that actually healing is bringing that outcast back into the community of the body. And so in this same way, this has really impacted my philosophy, that we have to have the love strategy. We have to bring things together rather than separate them to be healthy.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. Everything works together anyways in the body. So one small thing
separately, right?
Yeah, it makes total sense. Oh, okay. I could talk about this forever with you, honestly. But I did want to touch briefly on essential oils.
Yeah.
I know that is another large part of your practice and what you do. But I'll say this right now, listeners, I will probably be having Josephine back on to talk more about essential oils. And I also would love to have you on to talk more about your writing, because I know that you do a lot of writing as well. So we may have to do a little series of podcast episodes with Josephine if she's willing.
More than willing. I love to share.
Oh, amazing. So to get into, I guess, transition into essential oils, I guess, was that did that follow naturally with learning more about Chinese medicine, or did you do essential oils first and then?
Well, here's the secret.
Or are they not related?
My introduction to Chinese medicine came through plants. That a friend of mine sent me a commentary, like a little circular, a very small book about some herbal formulas, also by Ted Kapchuk. And he sent it to me because he said, "You're going to love this." And I read it, and the language and the beauty of what he was saying was so amazing. I was like, I've got to study those. So I was attracted initially to Chinese medicine to study herbs. And then fast forward about 10 years after that, when I had graduated from acupuncture school and I had just moved back to the East Coast, and I wanted to study with a man named Jeffrey Ewan, who's my Taoist teacher. And I met him. And at the moment that I met him, I was like, okay, I want to study herbs with you. And he was like, the herb class started a year ago. You can't, it's 2 years long and it started a year ago. You can't do that. But there's an essential oils course starting in a few months. You can join that one. So I thought, well, heck, I'm going to do it because, I want to study with him, but I really want to study herbs with him, but I'm going to do the essential oils class. I had no idea I was going to fall in love. Like, oh my God. I was like, oh my God, these are perfect. Because instead of there being like giant piles of herbs that you have to manage, there's these tiny little beautiful bottles that smell fabulous and work amazing. And you're like, oh, my entire pharmacy, it fits in this beautiful little cabinet and everything is perfect. I'm like, yep, done. And that was that, So that was a year that I studied with him in 99 to 2000. So I've been using them as they're my main way that I care for myself, as well as one of the main things I do with clients, because they're so easy to use with myself. And when you use them from Chinese medicine point of view, which is, again, different than the Western herbal tradition, which follows what's called an allopathic structure. So in allopathic medicine, headache, use lavender. That's the way it goes. But lavender, this is just an example. Lavender is an herb that is cooling. So like before, when I said you could have a headache that was due to cold, and if you had a headache due to heat and you use a little lavender, it's going to feel great. But if you have a headache due to cold and you're going to use a little lavender, you're just going to feel worse. So if I had not studied those oils from that point of view, I wouldn't know that, right? And the other thing that Chinese medicine adds to aromatherapy is the idea of blending things in a certain way. So we have this whole tradition of looking at the way things go together. How do they make the picture? How do they paint the picture of the person, like you were saying earlier, of the individual person? Like this picture is the picture for you. It's not the picture for somebody else today.
I'm like fascinated by Chinese medicine and become more so fascinated by it. Like every time we talk, I'm just like getting deeper and deeper into it. And I think it's so interesting. And the essential oils too, it's something where like I've heard about essential oils, but have never, like I'm a huge fan of lavender. So like I will just like have lavender in my home because I enjoy the smell of it, but not knowing any of the like effects of it and stuff. So I don't know. I'm really interested in learning more about that, and definitely we'll have you on to really dig into essential oils on another episode because I think it's just fascinating. And like I said, we'll have you back on to talk about your writing, which is wonderful. And I imagine is probably influenced quite a bit by the poetry of classical Chinese medicine, which I can kind of see, I think, a little bit the more I read of your work. So is there, as we start to wrap up, I guess, is there anything that you're currently working on or, any upcoming events that you would like to share?
Well, I'm working on putting together some essays. I think, more on my philosophy is on Substack, on the Monday Morning Notes blog on Substack, which is a great place to just see more about that thinking, because I'm always talking about that. And I'm always available to talk to people if they want to just chat. That's on essencepresence.com. Right now, this time of year is perfect for retreats. I've got retreats but they're always one-on-one. I also sometimes do classes. Very occasionally I've done group retreats, and I am considering whether I might try to do that again next year. It's been hard to do, particularly in-person group retreats. I've been doing online ones. And yeah, so.
And I'll be sure to share all of Josephine's information and where you can find her, including her social media and her websites, in the episode description. I would highly recommend checking out all of her work, especially the Monday Morning Notes. They're amazing. And also I wanted to mention they're called blueprints, where you kind of create plans, like healthcare plans.
Yeah. It's a sort of a deep dive into your current health situation, and we talk together. If you want to come in person, you can, but I can do them online. And then I write up a report with all of my thoughts on what next steps could be and resources and all of that, which is, I think, very helpful to people, especially helpful to people who might have just received a diagnosis that they find overwhelming or difficult, like a cancer diagnosis or an autoimmune disease or that kind of thing. I am like a detective. I like figuring out how it might work for somebody. So that's the place where that happens. And that's on josephinespilka.com. That's the healthcare work.
That's wonderful. I keep saying fascinated, I know, but it's because I really am. But I do find the blueprints really interesting. And in my mind, I can envision you like looking at a sketch of the human body and like pairing things, and like you were talking about with the essential oils, like what essential oils can be used where for what things that are happening in the body. So anyways, I think it's so interesting. I love all of it. And I cannot wait to have you on for another episode to keep talking about everything that you're working on. So thank you so much for joining me today on the episode.
Thank you so much. It's so fun to talk to you.
Yay. And listeners, I also want to thank you for tuning into today's episode. If you have questions for me or any of my guests, including Josephine, you can text or call us on our hotline, 252-419-6004, and we will include them in a future episode of the podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at Fun with Friends Podcast, and be sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening. And with that, get out there, try something new, and have some fun. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Fun with Friends podcast, a CEI media production. Please like, rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast as it helps us greatly. You can follow us on Instagram at Fun with Friends Podcast and on Facebook. If you would like to support the podcast, you can become a patron for just $5 a month. The link is in the episode description. Now get out there, try something new, and have some fun. Bye.